The notification from our joint account flashed across my phone. Transfer complete, $103,426.79. I placed my phone face down on the granite kitchen island, exhaling slowly. After 18 months of scrimping, saving, and working overtime, I'd finally done it. Paid off Nathan's crushing student loan and credit card debt. Every extra penny I'd earned teaching additional online classes at night had gone toward this moment. Tomorrow was our 5th anniversary, and Nathan would wake up debt-free for the first time since college. I smiled, imagining his face when I showed him the zero balance. The weight that would lift from his shoulders. Maybe then the distance that had grown between us these past months would finally close. The front door opened, and I quickly closed the banking app. This was a surprise best saved for our anniversary. Dinner. Nathan? You're home early. I glanced at the kitchen clock, just past 3 in the afternoon. His architectural firm usually kept him until at least 6. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the afternoon light, designer briefcase clutched in one hand. Something was off. His normally immaculate appearance, the pressed shirts and perfectly knotted ties he insisted on even on casual Fridays, looked rumpled. His face was blank, unreadable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. We need to talk, Elise. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was discussing the weather and not using the 4 words that chill every marriage. What's wrong? Did something happen at work? I moved toward him, but he stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. I can't do this anymore. He placed his briefcase on the console table, meticulous even now. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've made my decision. The kitchen suddenly felt too large, the space between us expanding like the universe after the Big Bang. What are you talking about? What decision? I'm leaving. This, us, it isn't working. He gestured vaguely between us, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light. The same ring I'd saved for months to buy when we were just starting out. When we'd eat ramen 3 nights a week to afford rent in our tiny first apartment. I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself. Nathan, if this is about the money, about your debt, it's not about the money. His interruption was sharp. It's about us. We want different things. We're moving in different directions. My mind raced, searching for signs I'd missed. Yes, he'd been distant lately, working late, weekend meetings with clients, the occasional business trip. But I'd attributed it to stress, to his pursuit of partnership at his firm. We'd talked about starting a family once he secured that position, once his debt was cleared. When did you decide this? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow. It doesn't matter. He glanced at his watch, the Rolex I'd surprised him with last Christmas, purchased with my share of a small inheritance from my grandmother. I've already found an apartment. I'll come back for my things while you're at work tomorrow. Tomorrow, our anniversary. The day I'd planned to tell him he was debt-free. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nathan, please, let's talk about this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. I reached for him, but he stepped back again, his expression hardening. There's nothing to fix, Elise. I've made up my mind. His tone was clinical, detached, like he was terminating an employee rather than ending a marriage. I'll have my lawyer contact you next week about the divorce proceedings. Lawyer. Divorce. The words hit like physical blows. You already have a lawyer? He didn't answer, just turned toward the door, picking up the briefcase I'd gifted him when he landed his job at the prestigious firm, the same firm where I'd pulled strings through my college connections to get him an interview. 5 years, Nathan. 5 years? And you're just walking out? You don't even want to try counseling? My voice cracked. the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. He paused, hand on the doorknob. For a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or doubt. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that same empty stare. It wouldn't help. Goodbye, Elise. The door closed behind him with a soft click, so anticlimactic for such a life-altering moment. I stood frozen in our kitchen, our beautiful kitchen with the granite countertops he'd insisted on when we renovated last year, the kitchen where I'd prepared countless meals for dinner parties with his colleagues, parties where I'd play the perfect supportive wife. My legs finally gave out, and I sank to the floor, my back against the cool refrigerator. My phone still lay on the counter, screen dark, the notification of the transfer no longer visible. The transfer that had emptied my personal savings, the money I'd been setting aside year after year, the safety net I'd built for us, $103,2679, gone, and so was Nathan. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet as night fell. I hadn't moved from the kitchen floor, my mind cycling through the same questions. Why now? What had I missed? Was there someone else? My phone buzzed from the counter above, startling me. I pulled myself up, legs numb from sitting so long. A bye. Text from Megan, my best friend since college. How's the anniversary surprise coming? Is everything ready for tomorrow? A hysterical laugh escaped me. The anniversary surprise. The dinner reservation at Bellissimo, Nathan's favorite Italian restaurant. The small blue box from the jeweler containing cufflinks made from the same meteorite as his wedding band. The card with the bank statement showing his debt wiped clean, all meaningless now. The phone buzzed again. Elise, you there? I took a deep breath and picked up the phone, my fingers hovering over the keys. How to explain? Where to even begin? Instead, I did what I'd always done in times of crisis. I turned to facts, to concrete action. I opened the banking app and stared at our accounts. The joint checking account we used for household expenses. The joint savings meant for a future down payment on a house. My personal savings, now nearly empty after the debt payment, and Nathan's personal account, linked to our joint accounts for easy transfers. Nathan's personal account, which, as of 5:42 p.m., showed a balance of $17.56. I frowned, refreshing the screen. That couldn't be right. Nathan was meticulous about his finances, maintaining detailed spreadsheets and setting aside a portion of each paycheck. Even with his debt payments, he should have had several $1,000s in that account. I navigated to the transaction history, a cold feeling settling in my stomach as I scrolled through the entries. A pattern emerged over the past 3 months. Large withdrawals, always in round numbers. $5,000, $8,000, $12,000. Never enough to completely empty the account, but systematically draining it. The most recent withdrawal had been this morning. $4,500, leaving behind that pitiful $1,756. I switched to the joint savings account. The balance looked correct. $43,612.87, but something made me check the transaction history there as well. Nothing unusual appeared until I went back 4 months. Then I found it. A transfer of $30,000 to Nathan's personal account. A transfer I hadn't made and couldn't remember approving. My hands began to shake. Nathan had been planning this, methodically moving money, draining accounts. Preparing to leave. I called his cell phone, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. A text then. Nathan, I know you took money from our accounts. We need to talk about this. Now. No response. I tried a different approach. I just paid off your entire debt, all of it. Please come home so we can talk. Minutes passed. Nothing. My shock was giving way to anger now, a cold, clarifying fury that propelled me off the kitchen floor and toward our home office. Nathan kept all our important documents in a filing cabinet, organized with his typical precision. I pulled open the drawer labeled Financial and began rifling through folders, our tax returns, insurance policies, the deed to our apartment, investment statements. I paused at a folder labeled Pinnacle Investments, frowning. We didn't have any accounts with Pinnacle. I opened it and found statements for an investment account in Nathan's name only. An account I'd never seen before, opened 18 months ago. The same time he'd started acting distant. The same time I'd taken on extra classes to help pay down his debt. I scanned the most recent statement, dated just 2 weeks ago. The account held over $215,000. My mind struggled to process this. Nathan had been pleading poverty, claiming his entire paycheck went toward debt payments and basic living expenses. He'd resisted when I suggested cutting back on his custom suits or weekly golf outings, insisting they were necessary for networking, all while secretly siphoning money into a hidden investment account. And now he'd cleaned out his personal bank account, too. The next folder contained something even more disturbing: paperwork for a condo purchase in Meridian Heights, the exclusive downtown development I'd read about in the real estate section. Nathan's signature was on the documents, dated 1 month ago. The purchase price, $750,000. Where had he gotten that kind of money? Even with the $215,000 from the secret investment account, that left over $500,000 unaccounted for. Unless a terrible suspicion formed. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the mortgage portal for our apartment. We'd refinanced last year to take advantage of lower interest rates. What I found made me physically ill. Nathan had taken out a home equity line of credit 3 months ago for $500,000 against our apartment, using a power of attorney I'd signed when he claimed he needed it to handle some repairs while I was visiting my sister last summer. The walls seemed to close in around me. This wasn't just Nathan leaving me. This was calculated theft, methodical deception that had been going on for at least 18 months, and I, focused on teaching extra classes and paying down his debt, had missed it completely. My phone rang, jolting me from my horrified trance. Megan's name flashed on the screen. Elise? What's going on? You never answered my text. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain the magnitude of what had just happened? Elise, are you there? You're scaring me. He's gone, I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. What? Who's gone? Nathan. He left me. And I think he stole all our money. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there. I ended the call and sat motionless, surrounded by the evidence of Nathan's betrayal. The condo paperwork, the secret investment account, the equity line of credit I'd known nothing about. And somewhere in the apartment, still in its gift wrap, was a small blue box containing meteorite cufflinks for a man who had been planning his escape while I'd been planning our anniversary. A man who'd emptied his bank account hours before walking out the door, for the last time. Megan arrived in record time, using the key I'd given her years ago. She found me still sitting on the office floor, papers spread around me like the aftermath of a financial tornado. Oh my God, Elise. She surveyed the scene, her face paling as she picked up the condo purchase agreement. What the hell? He bought a condo, I said numbly, and took out a $500,000 line of credit against our apartment, and has a secret investment account. She knelt beside me, pushing aside papers to take my hands. Start from the beginning. What happened today? I told her everything. The debt payment, Nathan's abrupt departure, the discoveries I'd made afterward. As I spoke, her expression shifted from concern to outrage. That calculating bastard, she finally said. He let you pay off his debt, knowing he was leaving? And he's been hiding money all this time? According to these, I gestured to the investment statements, for at least 18 months. Megan's eyes narrowed. The same time he started working late, so often. She made air quotes around the words. The implication was clear, but I'd been so focused on the financial betrayal that I hadn't even considered that aspect yet. You think there's someone else? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. She began gathering the scattered documents. What I do know is that you need a lawyer, a good one, not tomorrow, not next week, tonight. It's after 9. Roberts' firm has a partner who specializes in high-asset divorces. Considering what Nathan's done, I think this qualifies as an emergency. She was already pulling out her phone, referring to her husband who worked at one of the city's top law firms. And we need to freeze whatever accounts we can before Nathan can do any more damage. Her decisiveness cut through my shock. This was why Megan had been my best friend for 15 years. She was the action to my analysis, the push to my pause. You're right, I said, standing up on shaky legs. Let me get my laptop. As Megan made calls, I logged into our bank accounts, again, changing passwords and attempting to place holds. But for most actions, I discovered I needed to visit a branch in person. Tomorrow, always tomorrow. Diane can see you at her home office in an hour, Megan announced, ending her call. She's the best divorce attorney in the city, and after what I just told her, she's making an exception for you tonight. What did you tell her? That your husband drained accounts, forged documents, and is possibly committing real estate fraud. With your home equity. Megan was already gathering her purse and car keys. Come on, we need to move quickly. As we headed for the door, my phone chimed with a text notification. Nathan, got your message. The debt was your choice. Don't contact me again. My lawyer will be in touch. I showed Megan, who let out a string of expletives that would have shocked most people who knew her as a refined art gallery curator. Save that text, she said. It shows he knew about the debt payment before you discovered the financial manipulation. It could be important. I did as she instructed, then sent one final message to the man I'd thought would be my partner for life. I know about the condo, the equity line, and the Pinnacle account. You won't get away with this. I turned off my phone as we left the apartment, not wanting to see his response, or worse, the silence that might follow. The night air was cool on my tear-stained face as we walked to Megan's car. I can't believe this is happening, I murmured as she navigated through the evening traffic. Yesterday everything was normal. I was planning our anniversary, paying off his debt, thinking about our future. Nathan has been planning this for a long time, Megan said, her voice gentle but firm. This isn't a spontaneous decision. This is calculated. 18 months, I repeated, the timeline now burned into my consciousness. That's when he started acting different, when I thought he was just stressed about work and money. And when you started teaching extra classes to help with his debt, Megan added, anger edging her words. The pieces were coming together in my mind, a horrible mosaic of deception. He let me work myself to exhaustion paying off his debt while he was stockpiling money in secret accounts. And buying luxury real estate, Megan added. A new thought struck me, even more disturbing than the ones before. Megan, the condo purchase was a month ago. The final payment isn't due until closing, which is usually 30 to 60 days later. She glanced at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. So he might have been waiting. For me to pay off his debt? I finished. He timed his departure. He waited until I cleared his credit, making him more attractive in his new life. With his new condo, Megan added grimly. And who knows what else? Or who else? The thought that had been hovering at the edges of my consciousness finally broke through. There has to be someone else. This kind of planning, the secrecy, the timing. Let's not jump to conclusions yet, Megan said, though her tone suggested she'd already made the same leap. Right now, let's focus on protecting what's left of your assets and building a case for financial fraud. We pulled up to an elegant townhouse in one of the city's oldest neighborhoods. Light spilled from the windows, and the front door opened as we approached. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and a tailored pantsuit stood in the doorway. Elise, I'm Diane Levinson. Come in. Her voice was kind but commanding, the voice of someone used to taking control of chaotic situations. We have a lot to discuss. I took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold, leaving behind the life I thought I knew and moving toward an uncertain future. One where the husband I'd supported and loved had not just walked out, he'd strategically demolished our life together while building himself a new one with the ruins. As Diane led us into a home office lined with law books and framed credentials, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The shock was receding, giving way to a cold clarity. Nathan had underestimated me. He thought I would collapse, fall apart, be too devastated by his departure to look closely at the financial wreckage he'd left behind. He was wrong. I'd built myself up from nothing before. The scholarship student who'd worked multiple jobs through college, who'd established herself as a respected professor before age 30. I could do it again, and this time I wouldn't just rebuild. I would make sure Nathan faced the consequences of his actions. Before we begin, Diane said, taking a seat behind her desk and opening a laptop, I need you to understand something. Based on what Megan has told me, what your husband has done may constitute criminal fraud. This isn't just about divorce, it's about potential criminal charges. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. I understand, and I want to pursue every available option. Good, she replied, her fingers poised over the keyboard. Now, let's start at the beginning. Tell me everything. As I began recounting the events of the day that had changed everything, I couldn't know that Nathan's deception went far deeper than I'd discovered so far. That the empty bank account was just the first thread in a complex web of lies that, when unraveled, would expose a double life I couldn't have imagined. But that revelation was yet to come. For now, I focused on the facts at hand, methodically laying out the financial evidence of betrayal, while Diane took notes and Megan occasionally squeezed my hand in support. The night stretched ahead, the first of many I would spend piecing together the truth about the man I had married and preparing for the battle that would follow. Dawn broke with harsh clarity as I sat in Diane Levinson's sleek downtown office, surrounded by the emergency response team she'd assembled overnight. The elegant law firm with its mahogany furnishings and panoramic city views seemed incongruous with the devastation of my personal life, but I was grateful for the efficiency that wealth and connections could provide. The temporary restraining order has been filed, Diane announced, setting down her phone. Judge Harmon signed it an hour ago. Nathan can't access any of your joint accounts or sell any marital assets until the hearing next week. Relief washed over me, though I knew it was just the first small victory in what would likely be a protracted battle. What about the line of credit he took out? That's more complicated, admitted Terrence, the financial forensics specialist Diane had called in. Since he used a power of attorney that you legitimately signed, we need to prove he misrepresented the purpose. I rubbed my temples, fighting exhaustion. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. The power of attorney was for apartment repairs while I was visiting my sister, not for taking out a $500,000 loan against our home. Which is why we have grounds to fight it, Diane assured me. But right now, we need to focus on asset preservation and discovery. Nathan has had at least 18 months to hide money. People like him rarely show their full hand initially. People like him. My husband of 5 years reduced to a type, the calculating spouse who systematically pillages marital assets before disappearing. How had I missed it? The signs that must have been there all along? Professor Caldwell? A young associate appeared in the doorway. There's a Detective Rivera here to see you. He says it's about your husband. A detective? Diane and I exchanged glances. Show him in, Diane instructed, then turned to me. Let me do most of the talking. Detective Rivera was not what I expected. No rumpled trench coat or world-weary expression. Instead, he was a trim, precise man in his 40s, wearing a well-tailored suit almost as expensive as Nathan's. Professor Caldwell, he began after introductions. I understand your husband left you yesterday afternoon. Yes, but how? I'm with financial crimes, he explained, taking the seat offered. Your husband's name came up in an ongoing investigation. When we went to your apartment this morning, the doorman informed us of your domestic situation. The clinical description of my marriage's implosion made me flinch. What investigation? Detective Rivera glanced at Diane, who nodded slightly. We've been looking into suspicious transactions at Arc Vector Development, particularly involving their Meridian Heights project. My heart skipped. The condo development. Nathan bought a unit there last month. Yes, through an LLC registered in Delaware. His dark eyes assessed me carefully. Were you aware of this purchase? No, I just discovered it last night among his papers. What about Northern Capital Group? Does that name mean anything to you? I shook my head, but Terrence straightened in his chair. Northern Capital is the primary investor in Meridian Heights. They're based out of Toronto, but they've been aggressively expanding into U.S. real estate development. Detective Rivera nodded. Mr. Harrison's firm, Blackwell Partners, has been the architectural consultant on several Northern Capital projects, including Meridian Heights. We've identified multiple irregular payments between Northern Capital subsidiaries and various shell companies. One of those companies purchased your husband's condo. The implications slowly dawned on me. Are you saying Nathan was involved in something illegal? We're still gathering evidence, the detective replied carefully. But we have reason to believe Mr. Harrison may have been receiving kickbacks for steering certain design decisions that significantly increased Northern Capital's profit margins, possibly at the expense of building code compliance. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Nathan, involved in construction fraud? It seemed impossible. He'd always been so proud of his architectural integrity, lecturing dinner guests about the responsibility architects had to create safe, sustainable spaces. This can't be right, I protested. Nathan wouldn't compromise on building safety. Detective Rivera's expression remained neutral. People's principles often become flexible when enough money is involved. The payments we've traced to entities we believe are connected to your husband exceed $1.8 million over the past 18 months. $1.8 million. The number hung in the air, staggering in its magnitude. More than 10 times what Nathan earned annually. At his firm, Diane leaned forward. Detective, are you planning to charge Professor Caldwell's husband? We're building our case. Right now, we're more interested in the higher-ups at Northern Capital. He turned back to me. Professor Caldwell, anything you can tell us about your husband's recent activities, travel, or contacts could be helpful. I tried to gather my scattered thoughts. He's been taking more business trips lately. Chicago, Toronto, Miami, always claiming they were client meetings or industry conferences. Toronto, Detective Rivera noted, writing something in a small notebook. Any names of people he mentioned meeting? I closed my eyes, trying to recall. Someone named Victor, or Victor. Nathan said he was a potential major client. And a woman. Christina, I think. He said she was Northern Capital's project liaison. Christina Volkov, the detective said, his tone sharpening. Did you ever meet her? No. Nathan kept his work life very separate. A memory surfaced. Nathan changing his phone's lock screen. Password 6 months ago, claiming it was a new company security protocol. Detective, do you think Nathan left because he knew you were investigating? It's possible. We've been interviewing people at Blackwell Partners this week. Word might have gotten back to him. He handed me his card. If you remember anything else, or if your husband contacts you, please call me directly. After Detective Rivera left, I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this new information with the man I thought I'd married. Had I ever really known Nathan at all? This changes things, Diane said finally. Financial crimes investigations. Can freeze assets for years. We need to act quickly to distinguish legitimate marital assets from possibly tainted funds. I don't understand, I said, my voice hollow. Why go through with buying the condo if he was under investigation? Why not just take the money and run? Terrence looked up from his tablet. The condo purchase might have been part of the money laundering operation. Buy property with dirty money, sell it later as a legitimate transaction, clean money comes out. Or, Diane added, he didn't realize how close the investigation was. Either way, it gives us leverage. Nathan has a lot more to lose now than just a divorce settlement. My phone vibrated with a text message. I'd turned it back on before meeting with Diane this morning, half expecting more messages from Nathan. Instead, the text was from a number I didn't recognize. He's not who you think he is. Neither am I. We should talk. KV Christina Volkov, the Northern Capital liaison Detective Rivera had mentioned? I showed the message to Diane, whose eyebrows rose. Don't respond yet. Let me consult with Detective Rivera first. Before she could say more, her office phone rang. She answered, listened briefly, then hung up with a puzzled expression. Your department chair is in the reception area. A Dr. Henrietta Blackwood? Hetty? I frowned, confused. What's she doing here? She says it's urgent and relates to your situation. Minutes later, Hetty swept into the office, her imposing presence at odds with her petite frame. At 68, she ran the English department with the same precision and intensity she'd once applied to literary criticism as one of the country's foremost Shakespearean scholars. Elise, thank God. She embraced me briefly. I came as soon as I heard. Heard what? How did you even know I was here? Megan called me this morning. She glanced at Diane and Terrence. I have information that might be relevant to your case. Information about Nathan. My stomach tightened. What about him? Hetty took a deep breath. 2 weeks ago, the Dean of Faculty received a complaint about inappropriate use of university connections. A company called Northern Capital Group was claiming they had special access to university research through a faculty spouse. Nathan, I whispered. She nodded grimly. They specifically mentioned Professor Caldwell's husband in their promotional materials for international investors. They were implying that your connection to the university's Urban Development Research Center gave them insider information. The Urban Development Research Center, a multidisciplinary initiative I'd helped launch 3 years ago, bringing together experts in architecture, civil engineering, urban planning, and environmental science to advise on sustainable city growth. But Nathan has no access to the UDRC's research, I protested. I've never discussed confidential projects with him. Of course not, Hetty agreed. But Northern Capital was telling potential investors otherwise. The dean launched a quiet investigation, wanting to handle it discreetly to protect your reputation. The pieces clicked into horrible place. That's why Nathan left now. Not just because I'd paid his debt, but because he knew the university was investigating him. And possibly tipped off the police investigation as well, Diane added. The dean was planning to speak with you next week, Hetty continued. But when Megan told me what happened, I realized you needed to know immediately. I closed my eyes, feeling the walls of Nathan's deception closing in from yet another direction. He'd not only stolen our money and potentially engaged in construction fraud, he'd exploited my professional reputation to do it. There's something else, Hetty said hesitantly. Something I've suspected for a while but had no proof of. What is it? Do you remember last fall when Nathan accompanied you to the faculty achievement dinner? I nodded. Nathan had been uncommonly insistent about attending what was usually a tedious affair. He spent most of the evening talking with Jia Wei from computer science. Dr. Wei specializes in structural integrity modeling software, I finished, the implications hitting me. His program predicts how building materials will perform, under stress over time. Exactly. Dr. Wei mentioned to me later that your husband asked very specific questions about the algorithm's blind spots. Essentially, how to fool the software into approving inferior materials. The nausea that had been threatening all morning finally overwhelmed me. I barely made it to the wastebasket before emptying what little remained in my stomach. "I'm sorry," Hetty said, handing me a tissue when I straightened. I should have said something sooner, but it seemed speculative at the time. "No, I'm grateful you told me." I wiped my mouth, a cold clarity replacing the sickness. "We need to tell Detective Rivera about this immediately." As Diane made the call, my phone vibrated, with another text from the unknown number. "Time is running out. Nathan isn't just leaving you, he's leaving the country. Tonight, private airfield outside the city. I can help you stop him. Meet me at the Riverside Cafe at 2 p.m. Come alone. KV." I showed Diane the message when she finished her call. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "This could be a trap. We don't know who this person really is or what they want." Detective Rivera confirmed Christina Volkov is a person of interest in their investigation, I pointed out. "What if she's turning on Nathan? This might be our only chance to stop him, before he disappears with everything." "Detective Rivera is sending someone to the cafe," Diane countered. "Let the professionals handle this." But a stubborn determination had taken root within me. For 18 months, I'd been blind to Nathan's manipulations, his systematic betrayal. I'd worked myself to exhaustion paying off his debts while he stockpiled stolen money. I'd defended his long hours and business trips while he plotted his escape. No more. "I need to see this through," I said, gathering my purse. "I need answers." "Elise, this is a matter for law enforcement now," Diane argued. "You could be walking into danger." "The police will be there," I reminded her. "But this Christina asked for me specifically. She might not talk if I don't show up." Diane recognized the resolve in my voice. "At least let me send one of our investigators with you." I agreed to that compromise, and 2 hours later, I sat at a table in the Riverside Cafe, a nondescript coffee shop overlooking the city's murky river. Diane's investigator, a former police detective named Marcus, occupied a table near the door, pretending to read a newspaper. 2 plainclothes officers from Detective Rivera's team were positioned strategically around the small cafe. At precisely 2 p.m., a woman entered and surveyed the room with practiced efficiency. Tall and slim, with sleek dark hair pulled into a severe ponytail, she wore oversized sunglasses despite the cafe's dim interior. She spotted me immediately and walked directly to my table. "Professor Caldwell," she said, her accent faintly Eastern European. "Thank you for coming." She removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed me frankly. "Christina Volkov?" I asked. She nodded once, sliding into the chair opposite me. "I don't have much time, so I'll be direct. Your husband has been working with Northern Capital for 18 months, helping them cut corners on building materials while certifying the designs as code compliant. Why are you telling me this?" "Because Nathan got greedy. The original arrangement was purely professional. We paid him as a consultant. But then he became personally involved." The emphasis she placed on personally made my stomach clench. "With you?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "No, with Victoria Kuznetsov, Northern Capital's CEO. It began as a business relationship, but evolved into something more intimate." Though I'd suspected Nathan might be having an affair, hearing it confirmed still felt like a physical blow. "How long?" "About a year. Victoria provided him with offshore accounts, helped him plan his exit strategy." Her mouth curved in a humorless smile. "She made many promises, a new life, a partnership, both business and personal. And now? Now Nathan has become a liability. The investigation is getting too close, and Victoria is cutting ties. She's allowing him to take the fall while she distances Northern Capital from the construction fraud. Why do you care?" Christina. Hesitated, then reached into her handbag. I tensed, but she merely removed a flash drive, placing it carefully on the table between us. Because I've been working undercover for the Ontario Securities Commission for the past 2 years. Victoria doesn't just defraud American building codes, she runs investment scams across North America. The evidence on this drive proves Nathan's involvement, but also leads to the larger network. I stared at the innocent-looking device. Why give this to me instead of the police? I am giving it to the police, through you. My cover is still active and I need it to remain that way to complete the larger investigation. She glanced at her watch. Nathan is leaving on a private jet at 8 p.m. tonight from the Morrison airfield. Victoria arranged it to look like a business charter, but he's not coming back. You still haven't explained why you're helping me specifically, Christina. Met my eyes directly. Because you're not the first woman Victoria has used Nathan to destroy. 3 years ago, before your husband worked at Blackwell Partners, he was briefly employed at Ellis and Montgomery in Chicago. His direct supervisor was a woman named Rachel Montgomery. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Nathan never mentioned working in Chicago, because it ended badly. Rachel discovered irregularities in his designs, confronted him, and was going to report him to the licensing board. Then suddenly, she was the one under investigation for professional misconduct. Her reputation was ruined. Her firm collapsed. And Nathan resigned amidst the chaos, moved to this city, and applied to Blackwell Partners with glowing references from Victoria's associates. She pushed the flash drive closer to me. The evidence of what he did to Rachel is on here too. It's why I reached out to you. I couldn't let it happen again. My mind reeled with this new information. Nathan hadn't just betrayed me. He had a history of destroying women who got in his way. The jet, I said, refocusing on the immediate threat. How can we stop him? The authorities can intercept him at the airfield, but they need probable cause. That's what's on the drive. Financial records, communications, everything they need for an arrest warrant. She stood abruptly. I have to. Go. I've been here too long already. Wait, how do I know I can trust you? She paused, then leaned closer. Check the Calgary Herald archives from 2018. Look for stories about Victoria Kuznetsov's first husband. Then ask yourself, do you really believe Nathan will stop with just stealing your money? With that cryptic warning, she replaced her sunglasses and strode out of the cafe, disappearing into the crowded street before the plainclothes officers could follow. Marcus, Diane's investigator, was immediately at my table. What did she give you? I handed him the flash drive. Evidence, supposedly, and a warning that Nathan is leaving the country tonight. Within minutes, Detective Rivera arrived, bagging the flash drive as evidence and questioning me about everything Christina had said. His team left immediately for the station to analyze the contents and, hopefully, secure an arrest warrant. Back at Diane's office, I used her computer to search the Calgary Herald archives as Christina had suggested. The headline from December 2018 made my blood run cold. Prominent developer missing after yacht accident. Viktor Kuznetsov presumed dead. The article detailed how Viktor Kuznetsov, founder of Northern Capital Group, had fallen from his yacht during a storm. His body was never recovered. His much younger wife, Victoria, inherited the company and his estimated $300 million fortune. The investigation ruled it an accident, though some unnamed sources questioned the circumstances. Victor, the name Nathan had mentioned in connection with Northern Capital. Not Victor, but Victoria. The woman he'd been having an affair with for the past year? A woman whose first husband had mysteriously disappeared. Diane, I called, my voice shaking. I think Nathan might be in danger. Hours later, as the sun began to set, I sat in Detective Rivera's unmarked car outside Morrison Airfield, a small private facility catering to corporate jets and wealthy hobbyist pilots. We were parked far enough away to remain unnoticed, but close enough to see the main hangar and control tower. Are you sure you want to be here for this? Rivera asked, adjusting his binoculars. It could get complicated. The warrant only covers financial crimes right now. I'm sure, I replied, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. The data on Christina's flash drive had been enough to secure the warrant, confirming substantial financial fraud and Nathan's planned departure. Movement at the north entrance, Rivera's partner reported from the back seat. Black SUV approaching. Through the binoculars Rivera handed me, I watched as a sleek vehicle pulled up to the hangar. The driver's door opened, and Nathan stepped out, dressed impeccably in one of his designer suits, carrying the briefcase I'd given him. He looked exactly as he had yesterday when he'd walked out of our life. Confident, composed, showing no signs of a man whose criminal activities were about to catch up with him. The passenger door opened, and a striking blonde woman emerged. Even at this distance, her aura of authority was evident in her posture, in the way Nathan deferred to her as she gestured toward the waiting jet. Victoria Kuznetsov, Rivera confirmed. The team has visual confirmation. As they moved toward the plane, Rivera's radio crackled. All units in position, ready on your command. Rivera looked at me one last time. Last chance to back out. I shook my head, eyes fixed on the man who had systematically dismantled our life together while building a secret empire of fraud. Do it. Rivera gave the order, and suddenly the quiet airfield erupted with activity. Police vehicles converged from multiple directions, officers in tactical gear emerging with weapons drawn. Through the binoculars, I saw Nathan freeze, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as he realized what was happening. Victoria's reaction was different, a momentary stillness, then deliberate action. Before the officers could reach them, she had something in her hand. Nathan turned toward her, and even from this distance, I could read the shock in his body language. "She's armed!" Rivera barked into his radio, throwing open his car door. "All units, suspect is armed!" I watched, paralyzed, as Nathan backed away from Victoria, his hands raised. Whatever partnership they'd planned was clearly dissolving before my eyes. She had never intended for both of them to escape. Nathan was her scapegoat, just as Christina had warned. The officers closed in, shouting commands. Victoria slowly lowered her weapon, her calculated grace evident even in surrender. Nathan was forced to his knees, hands behind his head, the carefully constructed facade of his life collapsing as handcuffs closed around his wrists. As they were led to separate police vehicles, Nathan looked up and somehow, impossibly, his eyes found mine in the gathering darkness. Even at this distance, I could see the moment of recognition, the realization that I, the wife he'd underestimated, the woman he'd betrayed, had played a role in his downfall. Detective Rivera returned to the car. "It's done. They're both in custody." I nodded, a complex emotion I couldn't name washing over me. Not satisfaction, not exactly justice, but perhaps the first step toward closure. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we follow the money," Rivera replied. "Your husband's cooperation could make a significant difference in his sentencing. He might be motivated to talk." As we drove away from the airfield, leaving behind the man I'd once believed would be my partner for life, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from an address I didn't recognize, sent just minutes ago. "The money Nathan stole from you is in an account at First Cayman Bank. Account details attached. This makes us even. K." I showed Rivera, who immediately called it in to his financial crimes team. "If this is legitimate, we might be able to recover your funds before they disappear into the offshore banking system." I leaned back against the seat, emotionally drained yet strangely calm. In just 36 hours, my entire life had been upended, revealing deceptions more elaborate than I could have imagined. My husband was in custody, facing serious criminal charges. The money he'd stolen might be recoverable. The home equity line of credit could potentially be invalidated, but the marriage, the trust, The 5 years I'd invested in a relationship built on lies, those were gone forever. As night fell completely, I realized that today was supposed to have been our anniversary. The day I'd planned to surprise Nathan with his debt-free status. Instead, I'd helped arrest him at an airfield as he attempted to flee the country with his lover. Life had a certain irony sometimes. "Ready to go home?" Rivera asked as we approached the city limits. Home. The apartment where just yesterday morning I'd still believed in my marriage, where evidence of Nathan's betrayal had been hiding in plain sight all along. No, I decided. Take me to Megan's, please. I can't face that apartment tonight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, interviews with prosecutors, financial forensics, the beginning of divorce proceedings. But tonight, I needed the comfort of a friend who had stood by me when my world collapsed. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding my life from the ruins Nathan had left behind. Morning light filtered through Megan's guest room curtains, rousing me from fitful sleep. For a few blissful seconds, confusion reigned. The unfamiliar bed, the absence of Nathan's steady breathing beside me. Then reality crashed back with merciless clarity. My husband was in jail, I was staying at my best friend's apartment, and today marked the beginning of my new normal. My phone buzzed with a notification from a news app. Prominent architect and real estate executive arrested in fraud. Scheme. The story hadn't made the front page, but it was there in the business section. A brief article outlining the arrests at Morrison Airfield, mentioning architect Nathan Harrison and Northern Capital CEO Victoria Kuznetsov in connection with allegations of construction fraud and financial crimes. No mention of me, at least. Small mercies. The bedroom door creaked open as Megan entered with a steaming mug. "You're awake. I brought coffee." "Thanks." I accepted the offering, wrapping my hands around its warmth. "What time is it?" "Just after 7. Robert's already left. For work?" She perched on the edge of the bed. "Diane called. She wants to meet at 9 to go over next steps." I nodded, mentally cataloging what lay ahead. Financial forensics, divorce proceedings, potential testimony in Nathan's criminal case. "There's something else," Megan said, her tone shifting. "Detective Rivera called. Nathan's asking to see you." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Why would I agree to that? Rivera thinks he might offer information about where he's hidden assets in exchange for something. Your support, maybe? A character statement? She shrugged. You don't have to decide now. But a cold certainty had already settled in my chest. I'll see him, not because he deserves it, but because I need answers. Real ones this time. 2 hours later, I sat in an austere interview room at the downtown precinct, Detective Rivera beside me. The institutional beige walls and hard plastic chairs conveyed their intended message. No one was meant to be comfortable here. Remember, Rivera cautioned, anything he says about the criminal case could be used in court, but conversations about your personal relationship or marital assets would generally be considered private unless directly relevant to the charges. I barely had time to nod before the door opened. A uniformed officer escorted Nathan in, and the sight of him nearly stole my breath. Gone was the polished executive in bespoke suits. This Nathan wore an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, his normally perfect hair disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and stubble covered his jaw. Only his expression remained. Familiar, that carefully controlled mask of composure that had once made him seem mysterious and fascinating to me. Now I recognized it as the face of a practiced liar. Elise. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Thank you for coming." I said nothing, waiting as the officer secured his cuffs to the table and took up position by the door. Nathan's eyes flicked to Detective Rivera. "Can we speak privately?" "Not a chance," Rivera replied flatly. "I stay, or this meeting ends now." Nathan sighed, but nodded his acceptance. "Elise, I know you must hate me right now. You have no idea what I feel right now, I interrupted, my voice calmer than I expected. But I didn't come here to discuss emotions. I came for answers. His posture shifted subtly, a recalibration. Always adapting, always performing. What do you want to know? Everything. Starting with when you decided to destroy our marriage. He winced, the first genuine reaction I'd seen. It wasn't like that. Not initially. Then what was it like? Explain. It to me, Nathan. Help me understand how you justified stealing our money, taking out loans against our apartment, and planning your escape while I worked extra jobs to pay off your debt. The debt was real, he began, his gaze fixed on his cuffed hands. When we met, I was drowning in student loans and credit card debt. I never lied about that. Just about everything else. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. About 18 months ago, I was approached by Victoria. Blackwell had just won the bid for Meridian Heights, and I was lead architect. She invited me to dinner to discuss streamlining certain aspects of the project. Cutting corners on safety, I translated. Optimizing. Material selection, he corrected automatically, then grimaced at his own corporate doublespeak. Yes, cutting corners. The first request seemed minor, substituting one type of insulation for another, slightly cheaper option. The difference wouldn't appear on inspection, but would save hundreds of thousands across the project. And they paid you for this optimization? He nodded. $50,000 for that first change. It felt easy, like finding money on the sidewalk. I told myself it was a consultant fee, nothing illegal. But it didn't stop there. No, each modification became slightly more substantial. The payments increased. Victoria would take me to expensive restaurants, introduce me to wealthy investors. I felt important, respected. His eyes finally met mine. You were so consumed with your research and teaching, always working late, taking on extra classes. I felt like I was becoming an afterthought in your life. The audacity of his attempt to shift blame made my hands clench. I was working extra jobs to pay off your debt, Nathan. The debt you kept complaining was holding us back from starting a family, from buying a house. I know, he said quickly. I'm not blaming you. I'm trying to explain my mindset. I was weak, flattered by the attention, and as the payments grew, I started imagining a different future. One where I wasn't just Professor Caldwell's husband at faculty functions. Detective Rivera, who had been silently observing, leaned forward. Let's focus on the financial aspects, Mr. Harrison. Where is the money now? Nathan hesitated, clearly calculating his options. Some of it is in the Pinnacle investment account Elise found. Some went into the condo down payment. The rest is in offshore accounts, which you can access remotely, Rivera pressed. Yes? And you're willing to surrender those funds? Nathan looked at me again, something like desperation flickering in his eyes. I'll surrender everything to Elise. The accounts, the investment, portfolio, even the condo equity, in exchange for her support during sentencing. So there it was, the real reason for this meeting. Nathan wanted to use me one last time. You expect me to stand up in court and vouch for a man who systematically defrauded me and endangered lives by compromising building safety standards. My voice remained level, though anger simmered beneath the surface. Not defend what I did, he clarified quickly. Just tell them I was a good husband before all this, that I'm not inherently criminal. It could mean the difference between 5 years and 15. I studied him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. When did your relationship with Victoria become intimate? The question clearly caught him off guard. It wasn't. Detective Rivera knows, Nathan. Christina Volkov told me everything. I just want to hear you say it. He swallowed. Hard. About a year ago, it started as business, but evolved into something more. While you were still sharing my bed, while I was teaching night classes to clear your debt. Each word felt like ice in my mouth. Did you ever plan to actually leave with her, or was she using you all along? Pain flashed across his features. I thought we had a future together. She promised me partnership in Northern Capital's American division once things quieted down. I didn't realize until yesterday that I was just her fall guy. And what about Rachel Montgomery? His head snapped up, genuine shock widening his eyes. How do you know about Rachel? I know you sabotaged her when she discovered your unethical practices in Chicago. I know you destroyed her career and her firm before moving here and starting fresh. Was that Victoria's influence too? Or was that all you? Nathan seemed to physically deflate, slumping in his chair. That was before Victoria. Rachel caught me, altering structural calculations to save a client money. She was going to report me to the licensing board. I would have lost everything. So instead, she lost everything. The parallel to our situation wasn't lost on me. You have a pattern, Nathan. When women get too close to your secrets, you destroy them and move on. Not you, he protested weakly. I never wanted to hurt you. That's why I left instead of… He cut himself off abruptly. Instead of what? Detective Rivera asked sharply. Nathan shook his head. Nothing. I just meant I thought a clean break would be less painful. But the slip had revealed something crucial. There had been an alternative plan, one worse than simply leaving me. Victoria suggested something else, didn't she? I pressed, a chill running through me as I recalled Christina's cryptic warning about Victoria's first husband. Something more permanent than divorce. His silence was answer enough. Mr. Harrison, Rivera said, his tone hardening. If you have information about conspiracy to commit additional crimes, sharing that now would reflect favorably on your cooperation. Nathan looked trapped, his eyes darting between us. It was just talk, nothing serious. Victoria mentioned that divorce could be messy, that sometimes accidents were cleaner. He looked directly at me, something like genuine remorse in his expression. I shut it down immediately. That's why I decided to leave the way I did. I thought if I just disappeared from your life, you'd be hurt but safe. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implication settled over me. My husband hadn't just been planning to leave me. His partner had suggested eliminating me entirely. I need the account information, I said finally, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. All of it, right now. Nathan nodded, the fight gone out of him. I'll write down everything. Detective Rivera provided paper and pen, and Nathan began, documenting account numbers, passwords, security questions, the skeleton keys to his financial kingdom. As he wrote, I studied the man I'd once loved enough to marry, trying to reconcile this person with the Nathan of my memories. Had there been warning signs from the beginning? The charm that could turn on and off like a switch. The carefully curated stories about his past that never quite connected. The way he'd isolated me from friends who asked too many questions about his work. The flashes of cold calculation when he thought no one was watching. He pushed the completed pages toward me. It's all there. About $1.2 million total. Spread across various accounts. Plus the condo equity, which is around $300,000. The calm that had sustained me began to fracture. $1.5 million. You stole and hid $1.5 million while watching me work myself to exhaustion paying off your debt. I know it sounds sociopathic, I cut in, my voice finally betraying emotion. Do you have any idea what those extra classes did to me? The migraines from eye strain? The chronic back pain from grading papers until 2 a.m.? The friendships that withered because I never had time. All so you could what? Fund your escape with your lover? Create your new identity as a corrupt developer? For the first time, Nathan seemed truly affected. Elise, save it for your sentencing hearing, I said, gathering the account information and standing. You won't be getting any character references from me. As I turned to leave, he called after me. desperation edging his voice. What if I testify against Victoria? Tell them everything about Northern Capital's operations? Would that change anything between us? I paused at the door, not turning back. Nothing will ever change what's between us now, Nathan. But cooperating fully might be your only chance at a future after prison. Detective Rivera followed me out, closing the door on Nathan's stricken expression. In the hallway, he handed me a business card. This is Agent Melinda Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She'll help you recover the offshore funds before they can be moved again. I nodded my thanks, suddenly exhausted. What happens now, with the case? The investigation expands. Northern Capital has projects in 6 states. If they've been compromising structural integrity across the board, he didn't need to finish the thought. The potential for disaster was obvious. And Victoria? She's not talking yet. But we're building a case beyond what Mr. Harrison can provide. He glanced back at the interview room. For what it's worth, I believe him about rejecting any plans to harm you. But that doesn't excuse anything else he's done. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Outside the precinct, I called Diane, updating her on the new financial information. She immediately connected me with Agent Chen, who efficiently walked me through the process of freezing and recovering the offshore assets. It won't happen overnight, Chen cautioned, but with the account details and passwords, we stand a good chance of securing most of the funds before they can be moved. By afternoon, I found myself in the university president's office alongside Hetty Blackwood, explaining the situation to a grave-faced Dr. Lawrence Harrington. The university's primary concern was potential liability and reputational damage from Nathan's claims of insider access to research. We'll need to issue a statement clarifying that Mr. Harrison never had any official or unofficial connection to the Urban Development Research Center, Dr. Harrington said, making notes, and conduct an audit to ensure no sensitive information was actually compromised. I never discussed confidential projects with Nathan, I assured him, but I did occasionally bring home proposals or grant applications to review. He could have accessed those. Harrington nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to disclose that possibility to any affected partners. But Professor Caldwell, I want to be absolutely clear. The university stands behind you. You're a victim in this situation, not a participant. Relief washed over me. My professional reputation, the one thing Nathan hadn't managed to destroy, would remain intact. Hetty squeezed my hand as we left the president's office. You've handled this with remarkable grace, Elise. More than most would manage under the circumstances. I don't feel graceful, I admitted. I feel like I'm operating on autopilot. That's the shock. The anger will come later. Her shrewd eyes studied me. And when it does, remember you have people who care about you. Don't isolate yourself. That evening, as I packed a suitcase in what had once been our bedroom, the apartment felt like an archaeological site of a failed relationship. Every shared purchase, every photograph, every piece of furniture now required categorization. Mine, his, or too painful to keep regardless of ownership. My phone rang, Megan checking on my whereabouts. I'm almost done here, I assured her. Just grabbing enough clothes for a couple weeks. Take your time. Robert's making dinner, and we've opened some ridiculously expensive wine he was saving for a special occasion. He says your freedom qualifies. I managed a small laugh, the first in what felt like eons. Tell him I'm honored. I'll be there soon. After ending the call, I moved to the closet, pulling out essential clothing items. At the back, behind winter coats rarely needed in our temperate climate, I noticed a locked suitcase I didn't recognize. Using a hairpin to trigger the simple mechanism, a skill from my less affluent college days, I popped it open. Inside, neatly organized, lay multiple passports, driver's licenses, and credit cards. All featured Nathan's photograph, but with different names. Professional quality forgeries, clearly intended for use in various countries. Among them, I found a matching set for Catherine Harrison, a blonde woman who was unmistakably Victoria Kuznetsov. So they had been planning to disappear together, abandoning their identities for a new life funded by fraud and corruption. I carefully closed the suitcase, securing it for Detective Rivera. Another piece of evidence against my husband. Another revelation of just how thoroughly I'd been deceived. As I zipped my own suitcase, my phone chimed with an email notification from an unfamiliar address. The subject line simply read, "You should know." My instinct was to delete it unread. I'd had enough revelations for one lifetime. But something made me open it. The message contained only a link to a cloud storage folder. Against my better judgment, I clicked. The folder contained hundreds of photographs spanning the past 2 years. Nathan with Victoria at restaurants, hotels, on a yacht. Nathan in conference rooms with men whose faces I recognized from business magazines. Nathan at our apartment, our home, during times I was supposedly alone at work. In some images, Victoria was clearly visible in the background of our living room, our kitchen, our bedroom. They had been in my home. While I was teaching night classes to pay off his debt, Nathan had been bringing his lover into our bed. The violation was so complete, so absolute, that a strange calm settled over me. There was nothing left to destroy. No further betrayal possible. I had reached the bedrock of Nathan's deception. I closed the email, made a note to forward it to Detective Rivera, and finished packing. On my way out, I stopped in the foyer where a framed photo from our wedding still hung. I removed it from the wall, studying the beaming couple captured in the image. The woman in the photo believed in love, in partnership, in building a future with the man beside her. She'd been real. Her feelings had been real. But the man, he had been performing from the beginning, wearing Nathan Harrison like a well-tailored suit that could be discarded when it no longer served his purpose. I placed the photograph in the trash can by the door and left without looking back. At Megan and Robert's apartment, warmth and the aroma of home cooking greeted me. Their dining table was set for 3, wine already poured, soft music playing in the background. A glimpse of normal life, the kind I would rebuild for myself eventually. "Perfect timing," Robert said, taking my suitcase. "Dinner's just ready." "I hope you're hungry," Megan added, embracing me. "Robert stress cooks when he's worried, and he's been very worried about you." "Starving, actually," I realized, unable to remember my last proper meal. As we settled at the table, Robert raised his glass. "To new beginnings. And to taking down scumbags," Megan added with fierce loyalty. I raised my own glass, the expensive wine catching the light. "To actually listening to your friends when they tell you your husband seems shifty." We laughed, and for a moment, I could glimpse a future beyond the catastrophe of the past 2 days. A future where Nathan's betrayal was a chapter in my story, not its defining plot point. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rivera. "Preliminary structural assessment of Meridian Heights shows critical safety issues. All Northern Capital projects now under review. Harrison cooperating fully. Thought you should know." So Nathan had chosen self-preservation, turning on Victoria and Northern Capital to save himself. It wouldn't erase his crimes, but it might prevent future tragedies. A small redemption in an ocean of wrongdoing. "Everything okay?" Megan asked, noticing my expression. "Getting there," I replied, setting the phone aside. "One day at a time." Later that night, as I settled into their guest room, I found myself thinking not about Nathan's betrayal, but about the woman Christina had mentioned, Rachel Montgomery, whose career Nathan had destroyed in Chicago before moving on to me. Tomorrow, I decided I would find her. Not just to gather more evidence against Nathan, but to connect with someone who might understand this unique form of devastation. Perhaps in helping each other heal, we could transform our individual tragedies into something meaningful. Maybe that was the true way forward, not just surviving Nathan's betrayal, but using it to prevent others from suffering the same fate. With that resolution, I finally drifted into the first restful sleep since my world had imploded, dreaming, not of what I had lost, but of what might still be built from the ruins. 6 months after Nathan walked out of our apartment and into a prison cell, I stood in the bright September sunshine outside a cafe in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood. The woman I'd arranged to meet was already there, seated at an outdoor table, her attention focused on a tablet propped against a water glass. Rachel Montgomery looked different from the professional headshots I'd found online. Her once sleek, dark bob now longer, with strands of premature gray she hadn't bothered to color. She'd exchanged corporate attire for casual elegance, a simple linen dress and minimal jewelry. But it was her expression that struck me most. Watchful, guarded, yet undeniably resilient. Rachel? I approached hesitantly. Though we'd exchanged emails and had one brief phone call, this face-to-face meeting felt momentous, a collision of two women from different chapters of the same tragic story. She looked up, her shrewd eyes appraising me. "Elise, you look exactly like your faculty photo." She gestured to the chair opposite. "Her. Please, sit." "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I said, settling across from her. "I know this can't be easy." Revisiting the Nathan Harrison chapter of my life, a wry smile crossed her face. "Actually, there's something satisfying about it now that he's facing consequences. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have been ready." A server appeared, and we both ordered coffee, using the brief interruption to study each other. I wondered if she was searching my face for the same things I sought in hers: signs of healing, of moving forward, of lessons learned from loving the same manipulative man. "So," Rachel said when we were alone again, "Christina Volkov told you about me." "Yes, she mentioned that Nathan had sabotaged your career when you discovered irregularities in his designs." I hesitated. "But I'd like to hear the full story. From you." Rachel took a deep breath. "I inherited my father's architectural firm when he died unexpectedly. Ellis & Montgomery was his life's work, small but respected, with a focus on sustainable urban design. Nathan joined us right after my father passed. Charming, talented, with impressive references." "Let me guess," I interjected. "He was especially supportive during your grief, went above and beyond professionally, made himself indispensable." "Exactly." Rachel looked impressed. "Within 6 months, he was handling our most important projects. Within 8, we were involved romantically. By month 10, he had access to all our accounts and client relationships. The parallels to my own experience were uncanny." "When did you realize something was wrong?" "When city inspectors flagged unusual material substitutions in one of our downtown developments. Materials that met code on paper but wouldn't perform as specified in real-world conditions. I confronted Nathan, thinking it was a mistake." Her expression darkened. "He denied everything, claimed the inspectors were mistaken. But I found evidence he'd been signing off on these changes for months, collecting consulting fees from suppliers. Our coffees arrived, and Rachel paused, wrapping her hands around the mug as if drawing strength from its warmth. "What happened when you confronted him with the evidence?" I asked, though I could already guess. "He disappeared, cleaned out our joint account, resigned via email." A week later, anonymous tips about financial irregularities at Ellis & Montgomery started reaching our clients, the licensing board, even the Chicago Tribune. She took a sip of coffee. "The investigation found accounting discrepancies going back months, all expertly crafted to implicate me. By the time I was cleared, the firm was in ruins, my professional reputation shattered. And Nathan? Gone. Relocated with glowing references from people I'd never heard of. I tried tracking him, filing complaints, but it was my word against his fabricated evidence." She studied me with empathy. "And then he found you." "Yes," I confirmed, "though I believe I was targeted deliberately." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "What makes you say that?" I explained my theory. one that had crystallized during therapy sessions over the past months. My university connections, my access to research that could benefit corrupt developers, my tendency to overwork and overlook red flags. Looking back, our chance meeting at that charity gala feels calculated. You think Victoria Kuznetsov was pulling strings even then? I don't know. But Nathan showing up in my city, pursuing me specifically, it seems too convenient now. Rachel nodded slowly. The investigators found connections between Nathan and Northern Capital dating back almost 4 years, predating his time at Ellis and Montgomery. The timeline made a sickening kind of sense. Nathan hadn't just stumbled into corruption. He'd been Victoria's plant all along, moving from target to target as needed. I've been following the criminal case, Rachel said. Nathan's cooperation seems to be paying off. His attorney is pushing for a reduced sentence. 7 years instead of 15, I confirmed. Plus restitution. He's turned over everything on Northern Capital's operations. Does that bother you? That he might get leniency? I considered the question, one I'd wrestled with during countless sleepless nights. Strangely, no. I'm more concerned about the buildings, making sure they're reinforced or evacuated before anyone gets hurt. Rachel nodded approvingly. That's where I've focused my energy too. My new firm specializes in assessing and rehabilitating compromised structures. We're consulting on the Meridian Heights remediation. That's incredible, I said, genuinely impressed by her resilience. You rebuilt your career around fixing the very problems Nathan created. It felt like the only way forward, to create something positive from the wreckage. She hesitated. That's actually why I wanted to meet in person. I have a proposition. For you. She turned her tablet toward me, displaying a proposal for what appeared to be a research initiative. The Nathan Harrison case has exposed widespread construction fraud across multiple states. Your work at the Urban Development Research Center could be instrumental in developing new oversight protocols, combining academic research with practical application. I scanned the document. My academic interest piqued despite myself. A joint venture between your firm and my university, with potential funding from a Department of Housing and Urban Development grant. She leaned forward, enthusiasm breaking, through her careful composure. We could develop models that make this kind of fraud harder to execute and easier to detect. Save lives. Prevent other Rachel Montgomerys and Elise Caldwells. The idea was compelling, transforming our shared trauma into meaningful change. I'd need to discuss this with my department, but yes, I'm interested. Rachel's smile was the first truly unguarded expression I'd seen from her. I was hoping you'd say that. We spent the next hour discussing potential project parameters, our professional enthusiasm creating a bridge across the painful experience that had connected us. As we prepared to leave, Rachel hesitated, then asked the question I sensed had been simmering beneath our conversation. Are you seeing anyone new? After everything with Nathan, I couldn't imagine trusting someone enough to try again for years. No, I admitted. My therapist says I'm still processing the implosion of my foundational relationship narratives, whatever that means. I managed a small laugh. What about you? Recently, yes, very slowly. She's an environmental engineer, brilliant, kind, and as transparent as glass. Everything Nathan wasn't. Rachel smiled ruefully. My trust issues make for some challenging moments, but we're working through them. The she registered mildly. Another way Rachel had rebuilt her life differently after Nathan. I felt a flicker of hope that someday I too might find my way back to trusting someone enough to let them in. We parted with plans to reconnect in 2 weeks after consulting our respective institutions about the joint venture. As my rideshare navigated Chicago's afternoon traffic toward my hotel, I reflected on how different this visit felt from my first frantic trip 3 months earlier. Then, I'd been hunting for evidence, interviewing Nathan's former colleagues, piecing together the timeline of his deception. Now, I was building something new, something that might prevent others from experiencing what Rachel and I had endured. Back at my hotel, I found an email from Diane, my attorney, with the subject line, "Settlement approved." The court had finalized the division of assets, granting me full ownership of our apartment, minus the fraudulent equity line, which had been invalidated. Complete restoration of the funds Nathan had stolen, plus a significant portion of his legitimate savings and investments. Financially, I had not only recovered but come out ahead. The $103,426.79 I'd spent paying off Nathan's debt had been returned threefold. Money couldn't erase the betrayal, but it removed the financial anxiety that had shadowed me since his departure. Text from Megan followed. "Saw the settlement news? Celebration dinner when you're back from Chicago?" I smiled, typing back, "Absolutely. Bring Robert. I have news about a potential research project." Another notification appeared, an email from Christina Volkov sent through her attorney. She remained in protective custody, preparing to testify in the broader case against Northern Capital Group. Her message was brief. "Rachel reached out about your meeting. The research initiative sounds promising. I've instructed my attorney to contribute $50,000 from my asset forfeiture settlement to help launch the project. Consider it partial restitution for my role in this situation. Kavai." The complexity of Christina's position, both complicit in Northern Capital's operations and instrumental in bringing them down, remained a gray area I hadn't fully resolved in my mind. But her contribution would help transform theoretical research into practical applications, potentially saving lives. I could accept that as a form of redemption. My phone rang. Detective Rivera, whose calls had become less frequent as the criminal case progressed. "Professor Caldwell," he greeted me, his tone serious. "I wanted you to hear this from me before it hits the news. Victoria Kuznetsov has agreed to a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" I asked, tensing slightly. 20 years with the possibility of parole after 15, in exchange for information about Northern Capital's operations globally, including, he paused, evidence about her first husband's death. The implication hung in the air between us. "It wasn't an accident," I stated, rather than asked. "No. According to Kuznetsov, it was a carefully staged drowning. She's providing evidence against the two men who helped her execute it." I thought about Nathan, who had allegedly rejected Victoria's suggestion of a similar accident for me. Had that been true, or just another lie to mitigate his culpability? I might never know for certain. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "One more thing," Rivera added. "Harrison's been moved to minimum security after providing key testimony in the Toronto investigation. His attorney is pushing for additional sentencing reductions based on his cooperation." I found I had no strong feelings about this news. Nathan's punishment, whether 7 years or 15, seemed almost irrelevant to my life now. He had become a closed chapter, significant in my past, but no longer defining my future. "I understand," I said. "Is there anything else I need to do for the case?" "No. Your part is essentially done, unless they call you as a character witness during sentencing, which seems unlikely given the direction the case has taken." After ending the call, I crossed to the hotel window, gazing out at Chicago's skyline as twilight descended. The city where Nathan had destroyed Rachel's career and life was now where we were joining forces to build something constructive from our shared experience. There was symmetry in that. A narrative arc that transformed victimhood into agency, betrayal into purpose. My phone chimed with an email notification from the university. The subject line read, "Sabbatical request approved." The message confirmed my request for a semester away from teaching to focus on research had been granted, with the potential for the joint venture with Rachel's firm to be integrated into my academic portfolio. Freedom stretched before me. Freedom from teaching obligations, from the weight of Nathan's betrayal, from the financial anxiety that had defined so much of our marriage. I had options now, choices that were entirely my own. That night, I slept without dreams for the first time in months. The next morning, I met Rachel at her firm's offices to begin preliminary discussions about our research initiative. The space was bright and modern, with glass-walled conference rooms and an open floor plan that encouraged collaboration. "Welcome to Montgomery & Associates," Rachel said, leading me through the busy office. "We're small but growing rapidly, especially with the Northern Capital remediation projects." "It's impressive," I noted, taking in the energy of the place. "You built all this after Nathan destroyed everything?" She nodded. "It took time. 2 years of working from my dining room table, rebuilding my reputation one small project at a time." She gestured toward a conference room where several people were already gathered. "Ready to make something good come from all this?" For the next 3 hours, we brainstormed with Rachel's team and 2 professors from the local university who had joined remotely. The synergy was immediate, my theoretical knowledge complementing Rachel's practical experience, both informed by our intimate understanding of how construction fraud operated. By lunch, we had outlined a promising framework for developing algorithms that could flag suspicious pattern changes in building plans and materials. By mid-afternoon, we'd drafted a preliminary grant proposal that integrated academic research with industry application. "This could actually work," Rachel said as we wrapped up, real enthusiasm lighting her face. "Not just as research, but as a practical tool for regulatory agencies." "I think so too," I agreed, surprised by my own optimism, a feeling that had been scarce these past months. As I prepared to leave for my flight home, Rachel walked me to the lobby. "Have you thought about what you'll do with the apartment?" she asked. I couldn't stay in the place I'd shared with Nathan. Too many ghosts. "I'm selling it," I confirmed. "The realtor listed it yesterday. I'm looking at smaller places closer to campus." "Good. Fresh starts matter." She hesitated. "When all this happened to me, a wise friend told me something that eventually helped. She said, 'Rachel, you didn't miss the red flags because you're stupid. You missed them because he was counting on your compassion, your willingness to see the best in others. Don't let him take that from you, too.'" The words hit home with unexpected force. In my determination to never be fooled again, I had been walling myself off, scrutinizing every interaction for potential deception. The protective shell I'd formed was necessary for survival, but it wasn't a place to live permanently. "Your friend was right," I said finally. "Thank you for sharing that." Outside Rachel's office, I paused to check my rideshare app. A notification from my banking app appeared. The final transfer from the offshore account Nathan had hidden had been completed. With this deposit, all the stolen funds had been recovered. Financially, the Nathan chapter of my life was officially closed. As my ride approached, I glanced back at the sleek building housing Montgomery & Associates, Rachel's phoenix risen from the ashes of Nathan's destruction. In her resilience, I saw a possible future for myself, not just surviving betrayal, but transforming it into something meaningful. On the flight home, I opened my laptop to review our project notes. A new email appeared from a familiar address, Nathan's prison email account. I hadn't blocked it, though I'd never responded to his previous messages. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations on your research project." My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. I opened the message. "Elise, I heard about your collaboration with Rachel Montgomery through my attorney. Creating safety protocols to prevent the kind of fraud I committed represents the kind of person you've always been. Someone who builds rather than destroys. I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I'm genuinely sorry for the pain I caused you both. The man you married wasn't entirely fictional, just weaker and more corrupted than you deserved. I won't contact you again, I just wanted you to know that even from here, I can see you're turning this disaster into something meaningful. That doesn't surprise me at all. Nathan. I stared at the message, emotions warring within me, anger at his presumption, skepticism about his apparent remorse, yet also a strange sense of closure. Nathan had finally acknowledged the reality of what he'd done and the strength he'd underestimated in me. After a moment's consideration, I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. It was simply one more piece of the complex puzzle that had been our marriage, neither defining nor destroying the new life I was building. As the plane began its descent, I gazed out at the sprawling city below, the place where I'd experienced both devastating betrayal and the beginning of recovery. Somewhere down there was the apartment I'd soon sell, the university where I'd continue my career, and friends like Megan and Robert who had stood by me through the darkest days. The settlement money sat in my account, representing not just financial security but freedom from the constraints that had shaped so many of my previous choices. The research initiative with Rachel offered intellectual fulfillment and the chance to prevent others from suffering similar fates. For the first time since Nathan walked out, I felt something beyond survival or determination. I felt possibility. Not just for professional success or financial stability, but for genuine healing and, eventually, perhaps even trust again. The plane touched down smoothly, the bump of wheels meeting runway a concrete reminder that I had landed in my new reality, one I hadn't chosen but was now deliberately shaping. As passengers around me reached for their belongings, I remained seated for a moment, savoring the threshold between what had been and what might be. Nathan had walked out after I paid his debt, leaving behind an empty bank account that exposed a web of lies. But in losing the husband I thought I knew, I had found a strength and purpose I might never have discovered otherwise. As I finally stood to disembark, I left behind not just the airplane but the last remnants of victimhood that had clung to me since that fateful day. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also opportunity, the chance to write the next chapters of my life entirely on my own terms. And that, I realized as I stepped into the terminal, was a future worth building. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.